In after years, Jay was never able to make any real order of their nearly 4 years in what people named the oil patch. When they finally left after little Nan's birth, he was just glad. Of the 10 or so places they stayed for any block of time, he had clear, livable memories that he could re-enter. The spaces between loomed simply as huge, roiling, nervous clouds without even a single place name or date to grasp. Nervous because he was nervous, jittery. At first he even had to learn to fall asleep again. It was so changed from nighttime at the home farm with its comforting dark and familiar farm sounds, their own loyal dogs on guard, knowing when to bark and not to bark. Out of the nameless blanks when they moved repeatedly, a colored scene would sometimes torment him with nothing to pin down. His small self with 5 or 6 others, his size, playing follow the leader. He'd held back, wondered if anything bad was in that stuff, but then waded in right with them through a knee-deep slush pit of opaque liquid like pottery slip that gave them all instant brown stockings, and on out onto the grass, capering around, pointing at each other's legs and saying silly things. He could see the colors of kids' clothes clearly, but they had no names and were almost faceless to him. Of those years, he could remember the names of 4 or 5 boys, 3 of them friends, and the names of 3 girls that he thought pretty, but no teachers at all. He got used to it some, but he stayed afraid that at any time something bad could happen. It was the thumping oil well pumps and the moving walking beams, the big sudden fires and flares, the startling steams and stinks and gushes and hisses, even a whole refinery looking like it was about to blow up. Nothing stood still. His dad always looked for work. He got out his sign kit and painted a sign for a car lot or for a store. He made friends with painters and got a little trim work on a house. Through them, he met a painter named Jim Trogdon who did oil field work. Jay's dad came in beaming and speckled with red paint one day. I think Trogdon's dickering with Humble Oil Company for us some real work, Vida. We primed some catwalks and Jim advanced me $1 or $2. He said he wished we lived closer together to save time in the mornings. One evening, Jay's dad came in from his painting and proposed another move. Jim Trogdon said we could move in with him and Matty for a while. He's a good worker. We painted 2 derricks today. We're both bushed, but that's $5 apiece, and they promised that same $5 any time we can do it. Vida's eyes got big. My gosh, Ted, that's more than a month's groceries. Can you 2 keep it up? It's killing work, all right, harder on him than on me. Took Jim a half hour today just to get the red lead off him, but I don't know any other honest way to get that kind of money. If we move in with him and Matty, we'll cut down on rent, just share expenses. They've got a nice little house in Rusk. It'd be better for Jay. Jim said we could come on and get settled this weekend. There was nothing much to pack because they still had nothing. Jay's few things, his clothes and crayon box, went into his little black cardboard suitcase with its straps. 2 more suitcases and some bedding were the whole lot, with a box or 2. His dad's tools stayed in the car all the time. Matty met them at the stoop as they drove into the yard of a corner house just like all the houses beside it. A narrow, treeless lot, a white, flat, square house with 5 small rooms and 3-inch roof eaves. Matty was a slim, jokey woman with frizzy blonde hair. Right off, while they were getting settled, Vida told her she looked like Barbara Stanwyck. Matty giggled and said Vida looked like Betty Davis, which was sort of true, her big eyes. Vida laughed and said she never set much store by looks. Handsome is as handsome does. Matty sort of kidded around with Jay in the kitchen and said, "Look here, Jay," and the Indian shot an arrow in here, punching her navel, and it came out here, patting her rear. Vida shot her a "be careful" look. Just across the larger street that ran downhill past the house was an older 2-story white house with trees and outbuildings. Behind it, the ground dropped away into a grassy swale with an old inactive oil well, and a slush pit that had sprouted cattails and become a pond. Two little boats made out of sheet metal sat at the edge. Beyond, the railroad embankment ran through with an underpass for the street. Jay saw two boys working on something in the shady yard and went over to talk. "Hi, what are you making?" They had the bottom of a kitchen chair partly cut up. They were tanned and barefoot and looked like brothers. "This is going to be a tri-motor airplane. These are the engine nacelles." The bigger boy grunted as he tacked a pop bottle cap to a short piece of chair leg to represent a rotary engine. Jay was impressed by kids who could make things. He remembered his uncles and the gang dug out by the Tyler Roadhouse. "Are those little boats down there yours?" he asked. "Yeah," the bigger boy said, sawing on another chair leg. "Yeah, I made 'em." "Come on over tomorrow," the younger one said, holding the chair piece for the sawyer. "You can see our Navy battle. Some of our buddies are bringing their boats." Jay was curious. "How do you do that?" "Oh, we just sit in them and paddle with our hands and ram each other. It's a lot of fun. It's a big mess." But that afternoon, as Jay stood in the Trogdons' backyard, he saw a boy appear over the railroad embankment with an axe, march down to the slush pit pond, and begin chopping holes in the larger boat. Jay ran down to the road edge nearest. "Hey," he called, "hey, that isn't your boat." The boy didn't even look up, but he seemed to think his target had been whacked enough. "I know it," he said, and headed for the other boat. He slung his axe head high and began on it. Jay watched, feeling bad and helpless, just as he had when things he loved died, vanished, or were taken away. He climbed slowly back to the yard, wondering what made boys do such things to other boys. In the kitchen, he breathlessly told what he'd seen. "Those kids are always feuding back and forth across that track, Jay. Better stay out of it," Matty advised. "No telling who did what to whom when." Vida laughed hard at Matty's last word and said, "That's about right, Jay. Jim and your dad just drove in. We're fixing lemonade and tea to take along. They're taking us out for a swim at a nice barrel pit where they work. We'll get cooled off and come back for supper." The barrel pit water was clear and blue. The edge was shallow with firm sand and gravel. Water lilies floated near the far bank. Matty pulled on a funny white rubber cap with little bumps all over it. She looked like an aviator with her curls tucked under and the chin strap snapped. She dived in first with a whoop. Jay couldn't swim, so he played in the shallows, holding his head under and opening his eyes to the sunlit water. He stayed close to Vida, who didn't move much, just sat on the edge and washed with her arms. Jim and his daddy plunged in with a whoosh and floated farther off. Once Jim grabbed Matty's foot and pulled her under, spluttering as she swam by, making her cuss and slap and splash him back. Jim's belly stuck up like a watermelon in his undershirt. Mostly he and Jay's dad floated on their backs near the water lilies and talked about work, about how cool the air was up there high, and about the drilling crews around them. "Yeah, these roustabouts started calling Ted here lightning the other day, watching him go up and down that derrick. They have to, but they never seen anybody go like that," Jim said, laughing. Jay's dad laughed too, a little. "Well, at least I shut old Big Mouth up. He ruined the fellow's lunch with his strutting around." "What happened?" Matty called from the car. She pulled off her rubber cap and dabbed at herself with a towel. Jim grinned. "Old Lightning here gets fed up hearing him brag about his fights and stuff and says, 'If you're such a damn hero, let's see you carry that cable drum from there over to here.' This big blowhard says, 'Why? What for?' And Ted bets him $5 that he can do it and the guy can't. He'd make two of Ted. The guy takes the bet, gets hold of it, veins pop out on his head. He can't do it, says Ted damn sure can't. Ted gets up, rolls the drum up on the dock and gets under it, walks over to the pipe stack and sets it down, comes back and picks up his lunch. And the guy cusses and stomps around, says it wasn't fair, but his crew all laugh and make him pay up. That drum weighed at least 300. Jim laughed and motorboated for the bank. When they got back home, it was cooler. Out in the backyard, Jay saw the man next door putting a big string of fish in a wash tub. He ran and told his dad, who went over to talk to the man. Jay followed them, curious. He saw lots of pretty colored sunfish and some other long bullet-shaped ones his dad called bass. All on artificials down in the bottom, the man said. He stepped inside his house and came back with a slim bamboo fly rod with a small lure tied on a translucent silk gut leader. "This is my favorite bug," he said. To Jay it looked like a fat black horsefly with black hair for wings and big painted-on eyes. "It floats, and I just flip it around old stumps and cypress knees." The next thing Jay heard at supper was that his dad and Mr. Trogdon had a fishing trip already planned for the coming weekend. "Jim here says his cousin owns some land down there and farms a little," Jay's dad told Vida. "That's right," Jim added. "We went down last fall, and this'll be a good time because mayhaws ought to be dropping. Vida and Matty can bring back enough mayhaws for jelly. Man, I love that mayhaw jelly and butter on my biscuits." Jim smacked his lips. "Eddie and Maylene will be glad to see us. They're real folks." So on Friday afternoon, the men drove in and cleaned up fast while Vida and Matty loaded groceries and stuff into the car as a gift to Jim's cousin. "They don't have much to eat except plenty of garden sass and fish and game," Jim said as they drove them down into the bottoms. Jay's dad got busy telling them a snake story. "When I was still traveling for Warner Sign Company, I got down to Nacogdoches and stopped at a cafe to eat. They had a great big stuffed snake in the window, at least 20 feet long, with a cardboard sign over that said, 'Water Rattler.' So I asked the owner about it while I had my chili. He said a bunch of fellows decided to seine a long barrel pit with a big net. They had several men and boys on and behind the net. The slough was maybe shoulder deep. They needed to help keep the floats on top. One of the boys yelled and went under. They floundered around till they found him and pulled him out. He had 2 big bite holes in his thigh and was dead. They got scared, set off dynamite in the slough, and this big snake came to the top. They fished it out and stuffed it. That's the story." "Oh, Ted," Vida said, "now I want to go back." Jim laughed hard and said probably a circus snake died and got stuffed. Jim kept driving down lots of country roads with deep ditches on each side and crossing rattly plank bridges. Finally winding up at his cousin's place on a hump of higher ground. An unpainted board house on blocks with stock pens, a log barn, and a garden to one side, and the woods behind. The cousin showed up grinning, a quick little dark-haired man, and his wife came out, sort of shy, in a faded dress and a man's hat and old work shoes. They carried the groceries in, then grabbed cane poles with lines on them from under the barn eaves and headed down the path to the narrow cypress lake close by. Jay went from one to another, excited as they yanked splashing and flapping fish from the water around the funny cypress roots and the broad crinkled trunks. Matty got ahead of the rest. "Watch out," she yelled. "I just saw an old cottonmouth slide off a log over here." When it got late, the women took Jay and went to the house to get Maylene to show them the mayhaws. "We'll have to wait, but I'll take lard pails and we'll get us a bunch. I'll put some on tonight. I'm right proud of that sugar and sure gel y'all brought." They went across the packed dirt of the house yard through a side gate and down into a swale filled with clear water about half knee deep, where the little trees stood. The surface was almost covered with what looked to Jay like tiny floating oranges. Maylene had brought a homemade screen wire scoop, and they filled the pails very quickly. Looking into the water and bobbing fruits, Jay saw a tiny turtle pop up in front of his knees. It had stripes and spots of color and suddenly swam away, angling down. Back at the house, he felt tired all at once. They let him nap on an old couch while Maylene put on some of the mayhaws, and they talked and laughed in the kitchen. When he woke, it was dark, and they were still talking in the kitchen, now filled with yellow lamplight. He could hear sounds of supper being ready. He went out the back door where he could hear the men and see the glow of a hissing gas lantern. They were all three at a chopping block near a woodshed where Eddie was almost through with dressing the fish. They were watching Eddie as he talked in a low voice. And so she told the poor little guy that he was lucky that she caught him at it, and that it was a thing of the devil about all men and boys, and would damn him to hell if he wasn't careful. "How'd he take that?" Jim asked. "Well, he thought it over like a little kid would, maybe, and then he went out to a chopping block just like this one. He pulled it out on the edge and chopped it off with a kindling hatchet." Eddie stared at the listeners, who both looked down and shook their heads. Then Jay's dad noticed Jay standing there and glanced at Eddie with a frown. "Maylene!" Eddie yelled loudly, "Got your skillet ready? We're bringing them in." But it was too late. What Jay heard troubled him forever. Each time he thought of it, he knew that somewhere a boy like him was living, but mutilated. Something truly awful had happened. His dad told him when he came in from work with Jim Trogdon. "Jim and me heard the explosion, but thought it was for construction or something. We was up on the derrick painting when we heard and saw the ambulances go over the hill to the school. It just blew up and then crushed down, I guess. Almost 300 killed all at once. Teachers, kids. Only the ones out in the schoolyard escaped. The ambulances got a few that might make it, but they said almost everybody." "Oh my God, how awful for the families, but what happened? How could it happen? What set it off?" Vida kept shaking her head. "Oh, it was that free natural gas. It's illegal to use it because you can't smell it. They were saving money, I guess." "Anything can set it off. A spark, a lit cigarette." Later on that year, they actually moved to New London, where it happened, and into a hot, low-ceiling place. Jay mostly stayed outside and wandered around. They only had a couple of hot rooms. His dad said they wouldn't be there long because the derrick painting was about to play out. While he was roaming among the small houses with scorched front yards, he met another wanderer about his age, a boy whose elder brother had died in the New London school blast. The local boy acted really cheerful and friendly. "Come on to our house and I'll show you Eddie's room," he said. Jay felt curious and went along. The boy clearly thought that this was important. In a half a block they reached it, another low, white-painted rectangle with a lawn of burnt Bermuda and a homemade empty goldfish pool with a branched bone in the center. "That's staghorn coral from the Gulf," the boy said, pointing at it. "I'm the only one home." His new friend took him right into a child's bedroom with a fan blowing in the open window above a bunk bed with a plaid spread, a chest of drawers, a toy or two, a softball bat, and a glove. The boy gestured with his arms. "Everything is just like before. They ain't never going to change a thing. They're going to always keep it this way." The boy seemed very proud and stood waiting for Jay's reaction as Jay looked around curiously. He didn't see anything special about it. He saw no picture of the dead boy, Eddie, even. At last he nodded several times. They went back out into the baky heat that seemed to hover like a tent over the low house with its fans whirring in the windows. Jay often puzzled this over. He must have missed something. He should have realized something and put it in words. They moved again. At times when his dad had work and they were doing okay, and usually on a Saturday when he went into town for a while, he might bring a stranger man to supper. This fascinated Jay, who had to be warned by Vida's headshake not to stare so much. The guest always acted shy and smiled a lot. Jay recalled the first visitor best because he was so talkative, unlike the others. His dad came in first with a man right behind him and said, "Vida, this is Mr. Brenneman. He's going to have supper with us." The man wore a brown suit but no necktie and had his hat in one hand. He was neat but a little dusty. Vida said hello. After his dad and the man washed their hands, they sat and talked while Vida set the table. "No, I haven't found a thing," the guest said. "When Mr. Ross came by, I was there on the corner with my apples and my pencils. It's pretty hard for an ex-accountant, I thought." He glanced up and gave a wondering headshake. "Well, this depression, as they call it, is no respecter of persons," his dad offered in his mildest tone. He briefly sketched out their own troubles. Vida sat down and they ate. But it hardly finished when Mr. Brenneman surprised them. He stood up, murmured something about claiming his place for the night, thanked them both, shook hands, and left. This turned out to be fairly typical for each of the men his dad brought home. There was something odd. They seemed to be thinking of something else all the time. Even as they ate neatly and quickly and smiled and responded to his folks' comments, they never took second servings when Vida urged them to. For Jay, the most exciting part came when they said goodbye. It came in a flash, and it was almost scary. It was so naked. A look passed between the man and his folks that even a little kid like him could see. He was scared the most that he might miss it. But after things got harder in the oil fields and 2 more babies came, his dad never brought anyone anymore. Alligator picnic. "What have you got we could take for a quick picnic lunch, Vida?" his dad asked as he came in. "Not much. Some weenies and half a loaf of bread, some raisins maybe. Why?" "Oh, I found us a pretty place not far away. A little sandy spring branch makes a small lake, a lagoon in the woods. It's got an alligator in it, the first one I ever saw. He's a shy little feller, about 4 feet long. We could roast weenies and watch for him. Maybe he'll come up." Jay thought the place really was pretty, like a jungle movie. They rolled down a sandy track with woods on both sides and into an open grassy clearing beside the little lake. His dad cut the motor and led them ahead a few yards to a smooth knoll near the inlet stream. "Be quiet now," he cautioned him. "I'm going to make us a little weenie fire." He went toward a wall of bushes and vines where the stream came out. Jay followed him and watched the topwater minnows cruising around the stream. They had white stars on their foreheads and scoop-shaped mouths and were busily sucking in and spitting out tiny bits of flotsam. He settled down on the knoll with Vida, who put the meat package and the half loaf of bread on a newspaper from the car. In a minute, Jay's dad joined them, laying down a V of 2 soggy wood chunks and lighting a double handful of dead vines and fine debris between the chunks. All the while he snapped more dead vines and sticks to the fire. His dad squatted beside them and talked in a low tone. And he repeatedly glanced across the water. "A filling station guy in Tyler told me about this place. He's from Nacogdoches. We got to talking about how much we missed fishing and hunting. He says he comes out here some. You two keep your eyes peeled now. I'm going to whittle us some weenie sticks." He got out his pocket knife and slipped away again. Jay squinted hard at every part of the water surface. Vida looked too. Then she unwrapped a package of thick white butchered paper, still damp from the ice box. 6 thick red weenies with twisted ends lay inside. The dye from them had made pretty smudges on the paper. His dad's sudden whisper beside them made them both jump. "Well, have you gotten a kick out of watching it?" They whirled around and scanned the water again. Nothing could be seen but a driftwood log 15 feet from the bank, and it was so soaked that only some bark and a knot or 2 broke the surface. "I don't see anything but that old waterlogged chunk," Vida said. His dad's face crinkled up and he laughed silently. "That's him. And if you wave a hand or anything, he'll be gone. I don't think I'd trust you two in the jungle." He was in good humor over this as they sat by the fire. They charred their fat red weenies, turned their faces from the thin blue smoke, and watched their watery companion drift slowly back and forth the same distance from the shore. They pulled the hot bloated sausages off by wrapping a slice of bread around each and smeared them with shocking yellow mustard. His dad slipped away to the car and returned with 3 half-pint bottles of orange drink and wet newspaper. "Got these as I came by the ice plant," he said. "This was sure a pleasant and cheap little surprise party," Vida murmured as his dad quietly put out the wisp of fire remaining and they moved off toward the car. She had saved an end of weenie for the gator. "Bye," she said, and tossed it toward the water watchful bumps. They vanished before it hit the water. They all laughed. "That filling station guy from Nacogdoches told me also about a place he fishes on Mud Creek over a troop. Says he can catch a mess of bullheads there any time he gets fish hungry. It was late on a Friday and his dad had just pulled in from one of his short jobs. I'm going to take Jay and go get us a mess." Vida laughed at him. "Well, Ted, what'll you use for bait and hook, line, and sinker? We haven't got a thing." "It doesn't take much. I have a few Carlisle hooks and a hank of linen line in my toolbox, and I picked up a nickel's worth of liver on the way back. I'll cut us a pole when we get there." "Well, I've got cornmeal and onion. I'll cook them and make hush puppies if you catch any." The place wasn't far, but it was already dark when they reached the turnoff and parking place by a bridge. His dad cut and trimmed a slender tree branch with his pocket knife. Jay held the light while he rigged the line and hook on the slightly crooked branch. He cut up the liver on the car hood and put the bits into a tomato can for Jay to carry, then led the way down the path along the bank. The flashlight showed that the whole area, the ground and the bushes, the tree trunks, everything up higher than Jay's head was coated with satiny reddish chocolate mud. Each step they made on the path pulled off a perfect shoe print and left a layer on the shoe. His dad stopped beside a tree right on the bank's edge, a foot or two above the water. "This'll do. I want to be next to something to hold on to." His dad leaned down and dunked a tow sack in the creek. He flashed his light around over the water, then tossed the wet sack back on the mud behind him. "That's to put our fish in if we get any." He fished in the tomato can with one hand and baited his hook, then swung his line out over the narrow water course and dropped it in. Jay noticed a detail that made him wonder. "Dad, you don't even have a bobber." "I don't need a bobber with a tight line and no sinker." He switched off the flashlight. "I couldn't see it anyway." Jay had grown used to his dad's ways, but this place made him feel strange. He was wary of even moving and kept his arms against his sides. The flashlight had shown that the red-brown water looked just like the bank where he stood. It would be easy to walk in or slip into it if he was careless. His eyes adjusted enough to see a path of sky between the treetops and a few stars. Now he could see the reflected light on the water of the narrow creek. The air smelled and felt warm and moist and snaky and nasty. He wondered if the flood had come fast that coated these tall bushes by the path. Suddenly his dad grunted and Jay heard splashing. The flashlight came on and a fat bullhead catfish was bouncing in the air, its dark body and white belly flipping water. "Grab this light while I unhook it and get it in the sack." His dad quickly and carefully handled the fish, avoiding the dangerous spines, and had his baited hook back underwater in a minute. That was just the first one. In less than an hour, they had scraped the mud off their shoes on the car bumper and were headed home with a dozen bullheads in the damp tow sack. This was the first of several Friday night forays as long as they lived anywhere near Troop and Mud Creek. Jay was still bothered some about killing things to eat, but the fish fries were delicious. They had likely lived in a number of single rooms and tourist courts before they wound up in the first rent house, an area Jay could remember clearly, a house on the road between Arp and Overton. T.M. got a local delivery newspaper job for the Tyler newspaper, the paper where Vida once worked as a linotype operator. She claimed she had also learned to operate the big press, but the jealous resentment by male workers blocked her chances for moving up. This small house, 5 small rooms in a board and batten shell perched on blocks with a tar paper roof, never aspired to a bit of paint, decor, or even interior doors. It had no stoop. One simply stepped in. This was Jay's first chance to somewhat get to know a Texas neighborhood and its children. It wasn't the home farm or the Ozarks, but it was outdoors and out of town. They had arrived in spring 1930.